For one of Catholicism's most revered monastic communities, October 1st must rank as one of its most painful days, as public as it was painful. Abbot John Clausen welcomed some of the victims who'd suffered sexual abuse in the 60s, 70s, and 80s by the Abbey's monks and priests.
On behalf of St. John's Abbey and on behalf of the monks who have offended against you, I offer you my deepest and sincerest apology.
He apologized to the group, then, with their attorney, outlined a settlement of their long-standing cases. There was cash compensation for some. Counseling at St. John's expense would be offered to all. Members accused of abuse would be immediately suspended from active ministry pending investigation. And, in a radical departure from church practice, a new lay oversight committee, which includes abuse survivors, will not only investigate any new allegations, but make binding decisions on the fate of the alleged abusers.
Together we can now make it impossible or less possible for others to be offended by trusted authority figures.
The Benedictine monks and priests here lead both monastic and secular lives, as faculty for their prep school or St. John's University, and sometimes in nearby communities as parish priests. In the heavily Catholic central Minnesota farm country, St. John's Abbey is a pillar institution.
Anyone who wore the collar, anyone who was affiliated with St. John's, those people were respected, and you know, they couldn't do any wrong, and they were kind of put on a different level than other people.
And we instilled that into them when they were very little, that they were right next to God, you know, and I think maybe that was probably a fault of mine. And I think maybe that's why they hesitated to come forward to tell us.
What Arlene and Raymond Vogel were never told was that 3 of their 6 children were molested for years by 2 St. John's priests. Michael Vogel says it began for him at age 11 and lasted almost 2 years.
Your father and your mother said, you know, clergy don't sin, they don't make mistakes. When they tell you something, you listen. You know, they're great examples of the type of person that you should try to be. And that's where the confusion came in.
Confusion led to problems with drug abuse, gambling, and poor grades in school. Michael Vogel says it was only after years of therapy that he was able to tell his parents.
We had no clue where to go or what to do. You know, it was just striking out in nowhere, almost. Just, we didn't know where to go.
They went to the Abbey, and the response, they say, was total denial, only deepening their pain.
It was kind of a threatening resonance through that message that, you know, not only do we not believe you, but you shouldn't be taking our organization through the mud, you know, and you have no credibility, so don't bother talking about it. And that's when there was a decision that we ought to get legal advice and we ought to take legal action.
The Vogels contacted Jeff Anderson, a prolific plaintiff attorney in cases against Catholic dioceses nationwide. A decade of negotiations followed in theirs and about 15 other cases against the Abbey, which settled some of them on the way to the new agreement.
I think that they were motivated to this settlement by pressure. Pressure that the survivors have put on them publicly and in the courtroom. Second, by the realization through all this exposure that they were not doing a good job on this issue, and they needed outside help. And they, for the first time, were willing to trust the survivors and us.
Abbot John Clausen declined to be interviewed for this program, saying it was time for St. John's to move forward, that there'd be no more media appearances after the public apology made in early October. In keeping with existing policy, Clausen said 11 of the Abbey's 200 or so monks are now restricted for sexual misconduct. All accusations concerned conduct prior to 1990, beyond Minnesota's statute of limitations. And in any new cases, Clausen said, St. John's would leave judgment to the new Oversight Committee.
It's that secrecy and the power that they have kept that they're now beginning to give up and acknowledge, hey, we've blown it. We've shown ourselves incapable of doing this the right way. Let's turn it over to the people that can do it the right way. And that's a breakthrough.
But it's not likely to get very far, according to one prominent attorney who has advised church officials in sex abuse cases. Patrick Schultz says it's the fundamental right and responsibility of any religious community or diocese to run its own affairs without interference from outsiders.
It bothers me as a Catholic that the Bernard laws out there have not been held more accountable. But I have the same option any other Catholic does, which is to vote with my feet if it gets to the point where I can no longer in good conscience support my church. That's the way you hold churches accountable. The people in the churches hold them accountable.
Though abuse survivors will be outnumbered by others on the St. John's Oversight Committee, Schultz fears their passions will inevitably drive the group's agenda.
Imagine, if you will, if we had a civil justice system where if you're accused of rape, you're tried to a jury of rape victims. And we instantly understand what's wrong with that. You can't be objective when you have that kind of personal stake in it.
Under the agreement, though, the Oversight Committee is to be established by June of next year. For their part, survivors like the Vogels say they're satisfied with the agreement, but doubt they can ever erase the pain and guilt.
I don't have a difficulty with my faith, but I have lost my trust where it comes to dealing with the priest. And the sad thing for me is I feel failure toward my children simply because I never thought of them people being capable and doing the god-awful things that these people done.
You know what I needed? Was an acknowledgement, an apology, an action. And I think today all those things have happened.
And despite an agreement that brings vindication to survivors, experts say St. John's, like the Church in general, will still struggle to balance the rights of victims with those of clergymen accused of abuse. For Religion and Ethics Newsweekly, this is Fred de Sam Lazaro.